to share with you guys some of the stories or poems we write. And so Nature is the one who leads the non-fiction workshops.
Yeah.
Yes. And Ryan is a founder, director of Inkwell, who handles everything in Inkwell, and who also writes everything, non-fiction, fiction, poetry, scripts, everything. And Mark leads the poetry workshop, and he also writes like fiction, stories, scripts, and great poems as well.
The creative nonfiction workshop for Inkwell. So, one thing that I've always appreciated about creative nonfiction is the many different forms that it can take. Certainly one thing that I enjoy with Junia's pieces is how she moves effortlessly between poetry and prose, often within the space of a single piece. So I feel like in that spirit, it would be fitting to read a few poems that are very creative nonfiction-y. These are relatively recent pieces, so I have not edited them. They are simply what they are. I think I'll do 3.
Are they from the 100 Days?
They are.
So we are doing a 100-day poetry test, like with Ryan. So we need to write a poem every day with how many people? 100 people?
100 people for 100 days, right?
Yeah.
Now today is the 7th day. I've succeeded every day.
Yes, you have.
Yeah. I have not submitted every day because I have not written today's poem yet. Today's poem will be written likely at between 11:30 and 11:45 p.m. in the grand tradition of someone who really should know better than to procrastinate but does not. So yeah, I'm going to read 3 of these things. This first one is called Oracular, and is very much inspired by I have been enrolled in a classical Chinese class this semester, and it is hard. Ink groans beneath my gaze. Mass-printed simulations of brushstrokes, spiderwebs stretch outward, cracking the membrane of the paper. Midwinter in the American heartland, the lake froze too thick to bend under my coat cushioned weight. Unfocused the gaze, picture. Characters sprawled on whitened bone, bone bowed, bone beneath, uncertain waiting eon. Picture. Characters filling fractures, forming fragmented pictograms. Beast and meat and mane and mouth, whispering palimpsest remembrances, fragmentations. Breath clouding once we wondered about the resting pickup trucks and fishing rods, and empty buckets of worms and fast food wrappers, and corroded phones and muck-encased rings, perhaps waiting beneath the lake's frozen clean expanse. Long ago ministers whispered to their kings, metaphors circling around hunting dogs and rabbits that dug holes 3 times over, remonstrances of the everlasting affronts of the king of Zhou, whisperings of kingdoms forever devoured. Deformities in my bone bloomed from double helices, and blossomed to push against my pen-stained skin. Uneven shadows darkened echoed centuries. If cracked open, what future would my flawed marrow foretell? And then this next one is a poem that I wrote, the day before yesterday. And I spent the day kind of struggling to figure out what I might want to write a poem about. So I figured, why not go to one of my absolute favorite sources of inspiration, the 2023 Giant Shark sequel, Meg to the Trench. Which would make you think that this should be a funny poem, and yet this is not yet titled. Today I wanted to sink and plunge my poetry into profundity, until ears popping, lungs aching, I found my body bobbed ashore. I once beheld a spectacle, projected in laser boosted clarity, documenting the unseen possibilities of unmapped abyssal depths, where full miles filtered beyond the reach of the sun's waterlogged warmth, their jaws agape, their gills aflutter, Monsters reconstructed from scattered fragments of time-erased cartilage wait and wait until summoned by algorithmic simulations, powered by tax credits arcing the globe, until conjured by producers in trance, by spectacles promised profit, until the creature's full splendor basks in artisan-perfected light, driven to gorge itself to bursting, frenzied by its escape from crushing dark. And then the one firm rule I have set for myself in the challenge of writing 100 poems in 100 days is a very simple rule. If I go to a theme park, I must write a poem about that theme park to some extent. So this is yesterday's poem, inspired by a park in Shanghai. The current title is Illuminate Imagine, but I might change that later. Did you ever wish upon the after image of a firework, plummeting behind the facade of a forced perspective fairy tale, rising above foundations driven deep into previous plots of farm, bulldozed into blueprinted seeds, watered by reliable rainy profit? Did you ever assume that happily ever after somehow spans from Burbank headquarters to touch, yes, in the suburbs of Shanghai? Tonight we all crush together, guards bark into megaphones, reverberating with admonitions not to interrupt another's view. Couples protect each other's space, children perch on parents promising a wait of mere minutes more. Singular, I lean over a fence, gaze up. 10,000 cell phone cameras fragment the thundering spectacle into motion-blurred pictures compressed to the atomic confines of a screen. And my understanding is that if I have the microphone, I can use the powers of the microphone to make somebody else.
Sure, let's go with something that I feel like is kind of one of my favorite stories I've ever written. This is a short story that I wrote that did quite well, and it's it's playful, so we'll go with that one today. This one's called The Border Crossing. A small paw placed itself on his desk and slid across a small passport. Frank glanced up and saw a mouse standing there, trying to look casual, like it belonged at a border crossing in southern Lutra. He picked up the document and held it under the magnifier to check its validity, but as soon as he looked at the photo, he knew something was wrong. "This really you?" Frank asked as he looked up at the mouse. The mouse stood on top of a short stairwell that creatures of various sizes used to be seen by the immigration officer, and it looked around as if trying to find another mouse that Frank might be speaking to. "You don't quite look like this mouse." The mouse squeaked and pointed to itself very strongly, and in a series of hand gestures, Frank was unsure if the mouse was trying to proclaim its innocence or having a seizure. He listened for a few more squeaks, and then he held up his hand. "I'm sorry, not approved. You need to look exactly like your photo. Otherwise, you could be any mouse." He slid the tiny passport back across the counter. The mouse looked at the passport and then looked at the border, only a few meters away, but it did not attempt to run. It knew what happened to the animals who got caught on the run. "Next," Frank called out, and while the mouse stood there, quivering in rage or in cold, but it decided to turn around and walk back into Lutra, its passport clenched in its teeth. For years, Frank had been serving as an animal immigration officer after continually failing to pass the test for human immigration officer. Lutra started its initiative out of a growing concern that animals were leaving their home country and immigrating without any concern for where they were headed. As a result, registrations had to happen and transport was arranged with visas. Frank glanced across the border and thought about how ridiculous bordering countries were being by not implementing some kind of basic animal immigration control. Their animals were running wild, unchecked, allowed to roam wherever they wanted. In Lutra, they had rules, and he was the sharp edge of the immigration sword. "I said next like a minute ago," Frank called out. A red panda selected a mid-level stair to stop on and slid its passport across the desk. He opened it up, held it up, and gave it a look. The red panda, this one known as Bingo, smiled as if the smile might win Frank over, but he had seen it all. Puppies with their big eyes, snakes with their poker faces, hamsters with stuffed cheeks, and birds with colored feathers. Every animal had a card to play, but he knew better. He was falling for nothing. Mr. Bingo, I'm sorry, but you're in a protected minority. We need as many of you here in Lutra as possible. I can't possibly approve your travel. He stamped Bingo's passport with a failed attempt crossing to make the next immigration official check all documents thoroughly, but for now, he had done everything that he needed to do. Better luck next time. Try reproducing. I hear dating apps are a thing now. Bingo turned towards the border and seemed to indicate it with a deliberate point of its nose. No crossing for you. Go back and make a family. A little free advice from your local immigration officer. He pushed the passport closer to him. A moment later, Bingo picked up the passport and started heading for the border. Hey, wrong way, Frank called out. Bingo looked confused after taking only a few steps toward the border. Frank's hand drifted down to his stun gun. Back this way, Frank said. He waved with his arm for Bingo to come back, and after looking at the border for a moment, Bingo returned. Frank raised his foot to give Bingo a stiff poke in the right direction, but he lowered it. He needed to be professional. Next, Frank called out. He poked his head out the window to check the line, which was populated by at least 100 animals. But on the lane for cars, which normally stood empty, he felt the pounding approach of an elephant. His little guard shack shook as it approached, and Frank ran outside, his hand on his walkie-talkie. Code white, elephant attempting an illegal crossing. Over. He stood there in the middle of the road as the elephant trumpeted out something Frank could not translate, his radio to his ear waiting for a response, but no one answered. Hello? Frank finally asked, but there was no response. As the elephant drew near, Frank drew his stun gun and pointed it at the elephant. You're under arrest unless you quickly and quietly get into line with your passport, sir. The elephant kept charging and lowered its head as it neared, its tusks shooting forward like a brush guard. Frank yelled as he stepped aside and fired, but the two electrodes bounced off the elephant's tough skin and fell to the ground. The elephant never even slowed. It kept charging forward and crossed the border without looking back. After dusting himself off and collecting his stun gun, Frank looked at where the elephant had gone. It had turned, and now he could no longer see it. He raised up his walkie-talkie. Elephant successfully ran. That's right, we have a runner. Put it into the books. Make a record. Save the security footage. Over. He lowered his radio and clipped it back on his belt. No one messaged him back. He stood there for a moment, trying not to think about the line of animals behind him. But then he walked back to his shack and took a seat behind his desk. This was his place. He was in control. Next, he called out. A thin crane stood tall at the counter and dropped its passport out of its mouth. Frank picked it up and looked it over, knowing he would surely find something wrong. Thanks.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm also doing the 100 Days of Poetry Challenge. This, even though I was very excited and enthusiastic to do it when Ryan suggested it, it's a little unusual for me because I tend to be a very slow, careful, plodding writer, and I typically write like maybe 3 or 4 poems that I'm fairly happy with over the course of probably as many months, maybe even less than that. So hammering out one poem after another every day has been an interesting challenge, even though I've been writing poetry for about 30 years. I'm going to read 4 poems that I think sort of give slightly different facets of my views on sort of writing and art and poetry and life and things. Since Junia had to make a choice about who was going to read first, I'm going to read a poem that is about making a choice. And it is called Oranges. Oranges, Which of these oranges do you want? Do you want the orange that is fresh and firm with pulpy meat? Do you want the orange that is overwrought and soaked with citrus sadness? Do you want the orange that is still gripping a branch against all breezes? Or the orange that is still a seed in some prior orange? Or even the orange that is yet fertilizer amidst the soil? Yes, do you want the orange of this earth? Do you want the orange that is flecked from a fine brush across a brilliant Baroque canvas, featuring some distant orange orchard in the background of the fall of man? Do you want to join the capes and rapiers of the glorious revolution and swear fealty to William of Orange? Do you want the orange that is merely the ripe, wet, round word orange? And, okay, the next one...
I want to start building.
The next one that I'm going to read is the poem that I published this morning, actually posted this morning in the group. This is very strange for me to read something I just wrote. And I'm also reading this because I know that Junia has published some poems this year about flowers. There was a flower anthology, flower poetry anthology, and this poem also features flowers. This poem is called Finches. The finches flit from the railing to a pot of peonies in bloom on the rooftop cafe's terrace. Terrors to pollinating bees and careless alighting flies. Their spearheads swivel, black eyes roll, weighing angles of the prey. The finch wings flap to flutter hop, to intercept an insect, and dart to little kills. Then chirp and trill the news, this hunt is done. Finches scoop up a slice of sky and bank upon a breeze, gliding onto an adjacent neighborhood, spying their next attack from atop its tallest trees. Diminutive ancient avian marvels born of wind, toward the pastel scent of peonies in bloom, amidst my latte sips, the finches flit and hunt. This next one, so like most poets in the last 100 years or so, I mostly write in free verse, but I'm also very interested in older and more formal verses, and some of these formal verses, formal verse structures kind of come in and out of fashion over time. One that I'm particularly interested in is called the villanelle, and this has a specific rhyme scheme and a specific repetition of repeated lines throughout the poem that the intention of the form is to sort of subtly change the meaning of the repeated line throughout from the beginning to the end. And in honor of the fact that we have a lot of very creative people here today, I'm reading this poem. And this poem is called Create. Think not this world is made of malice, bend it down to earth and sow a seed. Create to make this life a palace. Although the working life is callous, go to your land, pull out each weed. Think not this world is made of malice. Engrave your name in time's italics, and till your soil with every deed. Create to make this life a palace. Lazily consume to live like Alice, fleeing the Red Queen's angry greed. Think not this world is made of malice. Dazzling aurora borealis pales to lightning of muses' need. Create to make this life a palace. So toast your works from homemade chalice, and guzzle your handcrafted mead. Think not this world is made of malice. Create to make this life a palace. Okay, and one more. So I originally showed this one to Junia when it was in a rough draft. Junia and I bounced poems back and forth to each other for a bit. It's on probably the third draft now, and the title is different from when I first sent it to her. But I know that she enjoyed this when I sent it to her. So this last one is called Free Dive. Tell me, were you also ocean life, wading out through the tidal froth, striding through trough? wading out through the tidal froth, striding through trough, gliding beneath crest. Did you see both worlds at the submergent moment, finding that the lungs, filling with the salt of the surf, would remember our waddling guild ancestor, would return home to our marine origin and let go glad? Were the squids so kind to you as well as the jellyfish? Were they gentle as clouds, or did they cling as trash bags, whipped in a tropical storm, sting as wasps defending the nest? Swimming down into the ink, past ominous, warbling echoes in bleak distances, the sidling of whale hide, lumbering enormity hidden in shadows beyond sight, or fleeter, hungrier fishes, lurking in the currents or in the mine. How did you find the twilight? Did you refract alongside the last riffling needles of light? Did you resist the unlit domain? Approaching the dim depth, building beneath all hope of kelp, toward unknown carcass, wreck, or ruin, knowing one oughtn't dive so deep. Was the pressure to crush a vessel elegant against your glittering scales? Did the curiosity pull you as a magnet, gripping the iron in your heart? Or were you secretly kicking optimistic fins? What did you find in the deep of the deep? A darkness beyond all thought of life? Or a strange fluorescent light, a hydrothermal vent's ghostly lamp, a goblin's glowing lure, abundance teeming before creation? Was there truth in the absence of sense? Was there beauty in the primordiality of experience? Did you forget about our surface world, the bipedal stumble along the floor of our wispy ocean of atmosphere? Did you forget how to genuflect, to bend the tendon and bone before the dominion of the Anthropocene, evolving to collect the bubbles arising in the dark? Tell me, were you ocean life too? Thank you. I don't actually know who else is.
Was on the stage, maybe with Ryan, long time ago. So today I will read a piece I wrote in nonfiction workshop. It's called Places Afar. At the end of the National Road 318, it's New Zealand of China, Xinjiang, Tibet, Lanzhou, and 3 provinces on highland look vastly different from the views of the lower plains. When I arrived in Tibet, I felt broken. Lying on the hotel bed, I woke up to see the messages in the work chat. Consultants and teachers all busy with inquiries and work plans, but I was out. Clouds floated low outside the window. Silver sunshine shone brightly. Low hills stood at the back of some white houses. I was the one who no longer belonged to that group. 3 years into my stay in Shanghai, I lost my job. I taught 108 hours a month on average and was well paid for the work. How could I possibly find another job to surpass the old one? Thoughts kept pumping into my head. 3 p.m. A hunger swept over me, and I moved downstairs to get food. Walking on the streets, the city had a similar look with the town I was raised. Main streets and shops on both sides. Taxis drove by inside the green fences to separate lanes. I didn't check my map, wandering around to see any restaurants. I walked into a wonton shop and filled my stomach. I left and kept walking on the street. The Mid-Autumn Festival was around the corner. I went inside a gift shop and bought a few mooncakes for the team I was about to meet in the evening. Tibet, the dreamland for many. People call it the holy place to purify your soul. People drive to it and take the train to visit it. It's a utopia at the end of the national highway. In history, a princess of Tang Dynasty, was married to the ruler Songtsen Gampo and helped the development of Buddhism in the area. Religion became part of the locals' life. People saw pictures of them circling the mountains and kneel on all bodies to make the pilgrimage. We were like two human species running after different things. I was here to see the people, the mountains, and the temples. I sat down on a bench and looked at the moon behind tree branches. Traffic on the road was busy. School children went back home to join their parents for dinner. It was the same as my city, or maybe every city in China. The similar daily routines. I went back to the gathering room in my hotel and found some people sitting there. It's the orientation meeting for group members. Elephant Sister, our guide.
Published yet, so I think I'm going to just read it here. I don't know how long it's going to take. If we have time, then I'm going to share a little bit, like 2 or 3 poems too. Okay. I was playing hide and seek with my cousins. They lived in the city and had come back with their parents to visit us in the old house. 3, 2, 1. I shouted into the air, eyes closed, then opened them and rushed into the house. It was my turn to be the seeker. I ran through the kitchen where my grandmother, mother, and aunt-in-law were cooking dinner and headed to the second floor. I had heard footsteps pacing up the wooden stairs and moving through the rooms upstairs. The giggling and panting had quieted, but I could hear the squeaks of the old floorboards from my grandmother's bedroom. The door creaked slightly at my push. I was about to run in when I saw an old man searching in the cabinet beside the bed, his hunched back toward me. The room was dim. There was no window and the light was off. I couldn't see his face, but his dark blue coarse cotton clothes looked familiar. It was too thin for winter, though that didn't seem to bother him, nor did my sudden intrusion. He continued his silent search in the cabinet. I could hear nothing but my heart pounding heavily from all the running and excitement. After some groping, he grabbed something and slipped it into his pocket, lifted the bamboo basket from the floor, strapped it to his back, and turned his face towards me, or rather, the door. I recognized him. That was my grandfather, who died 2 years ago. His face was exactly as I remembered it. A high bridge nose, then thin lips, slightly sunken cheeks, and a forehead creased with wrinkles. He looked weary, yet relaxed, an expression he used to wear when resting. His round eyes reminded me of the stone water tank in front of the house, dented at the edges and covered with moss at the bottom, but always filled with clear, serene water. His half-black, half-gray hair was a little bit messy, like his hair usually was after a long working day in the fields. In his left chest pocket was a cigar, which he often smoked while sitting in front of the house, enjoying his leisure time at dusk. Still panting, I tried to steady my breath, sweat dripping into my eyelids, my heart fluttering, ready to leap from my chest. I wanted to run up to him, but I couldn't move. I wanted to shout to others, "Look who's back!" But my open mouth couldn't make any sound. I stared into his eyes to seek recognition. He didn't look back. As I stood there petrified, he walked straight past me as if I didn't exist, then headed downstairs into the kitchen where my grandmother, mother, aunt, and aunt-in-law were chopping potatoes, feeding the fire, and stewing delicious-smelling soup. No one turned their head. He didn't either. He strode past them, stepped out of the house, and disappeared into the woods. When my grandfather died, I was 6 years old, and I was told he had gone to a distant place. I was sad he hadn't said goodbye, and I kept crying, asking when he would come back. His presence had been an essential part of the house. He lived his entire life high on this mountain, and since I was born, he had always been by my side. He climbed up the slender cherry tree in the nearby forest to pick her cherries for me in spring, and grew watermelons in the fields for us in summer. On warm, breezy nights, he would make a bed under the osmanthus tree with bamboo sticks and sleeping mats. While I counted the stars among the layered leaves on the bed, he would sit down beside me and tell me all kinds of mystical stories. How Pangu, the first being of the universe, separated heaven and earth, and upon his death, his body transformed into the mountains, rivers, the sun, the moon, and the stars. How the lady Meng Jiang made a long journey to deliver winter clothes to her husband, who had been drafted to construct the Great Wall in the Qing dynasty. He knew how to keep me hooked, and would stop when Meng Jiang finally arrived at the Great Wall. I pestered him. What happens next? He'd just smile. I'll tell you tomorrow. When I kept nudging him, he usually gave in. He would tell me that Meng Jiang arrived only to find her husband dead from the brutal labor, and her anguished weeping collapsed the wall, exposing his bones underground so she could properly bury him. Then I would doze off, satisfied. After he left, no one told me those stories. Grandpa has come back to visit us. I told my grandmother and parents after seeing him that day. They looked away as if they hadn't heard me. I asked my cousin, who had been hiding the wardrobe in my grandmother's bedroom, whether he had seen him. He laughed and said I had gone crazy. I ran to the woods where my grandpa had walked into. Grandpa! Grandpa! My voice echoed back in fading waves, soon swallowed by the vast quiet of the woods. The towering trees stood around me solemnly, indifferent to my eagerly searching eyes. 2 birds fluttered and chirped among the branches, oblivious to my desperate cries. Did I have illusions? Was I daydreaming? I hoped he would come back soon to prove that I wasn't, but he didn't, until all the details blurred into vague images. It was one of those long, hot summer days when everything had to be done early. At dawn, my father went to tend the crops in the fields, and my mother to cut grass for pig fodder. My grandmother and I watered the fields close to our home. By the time the sun scorched high in the sky, we had come back indoors to rest. I did homework, had lunch, then went for a nap. The world seemed to have paused, with all voices muffled by the sweltering heat. Only the old fan standing beside my bed continued to converse in its rhythmical whirring. As I listened to its steady rattling amid the drowsy silence, my eyelids grew heavy. I woke up with my hair and back drenched in sweat. I shuffled to the kitchen and poured myself a large cup of water. As I gulped it down, I could hear my grandmother and mother talking in low voices on the porch outside the living room. I turned around and saw a man sitting on a couch, sipping from a teacup. I thought it was my father, but upon a second look, I realized it wasn't him. This was a younger man, probably in his early 30s. He was taller, slimmer, and dressed in a strange long robe that I had seen in TV dramas from old times, and in my grandparents' old photo on the wall in the living room. Oh, wait! I stopped drinking and moved closer to the man. His smooth skin and firm gaze radiated an energy I couldn't recognize. However, his high nose, round eyes, and thin lips suggested that he was a person I had been longing to meet again since the dreamy encounter 4 years ago. The black and white photo of my grandparents sitting sternly on the bench in front of the old house was hanging on the wall above me. My eyes darted between the man in the photo and the man on the couch. They were the same man. I must be dreaming again. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. He was there. I closed my eyes and reopened them. He remained. In the bright daylight, I could see the creases in his robe, the brown dirt on his black shoes, and the steam rising from his teacup. I turned to see if my grandmother and mother had noticed. They hadn't. Even when I called out to them, they didn't respond. Like the first time, he didn't look at me. I carefully moved to his front and waved my hands. His blank stare into the distance remained undistracted. Before I tried further to disturb him, he stood up. walked to the kitchen to refill his tea, and went out the door. I followed him out, but he had vanished into the blazing afternoon heat. Soon, I left home for junior high boarding school. But every time I returned to that house on weekends and holidays, I searched for him. When I opened the door, I wondered if he would show up behind it. When I woke from sleep, I scanned the room to see if he was there. Every time I lifted my head or looked around, I hoped he would reappear and surprise me. He didn't make me wait too long. I saw him again. I saw him again 1 year later during my summer vacation. A few months after that, we met once more, then another time weeks later. Eventually, I lost count and became accustomed to him being both present and absent in my life. I saw him eating, sleeping, chopping firewood, or simply staring into the distance. Sometimes he was visible for minutes, other times just a few seconds. Occasionally, he appeared as a teenager, perhaps even as a child, though I might not have recognized him, while at other times he reverted to an old man. I had remembered him as an old man before he died, with a hunchback, gray hair, and a wrinkled face. Through these encounters, I came to know more about him. He being a handsome young man in his early 20s that I would have fallen in love with if I were a young woman then. He enjoyed reading graphic books when he wasn't farming, which might be where he learned the stories he told me. He liked chicken feet too, though I had thought otherwise, since he always gave the only chicken feet in the soup to me. And although he always woke up at early dawn, as far as I could remember, he was once a lazy teenager who didn't wake up until the dazzling sunlight pouring through the window pried his eyelids open. He never interacted with me in the secret meetings. I couldn't touch or speak to him. Several times when I tried to reach out, he disappeared immediately. I also gave up trying to talk about his presence with others. Every word I spoke about of his presence seemed muffled. Once, when my grandfather was visible, I saw my mother's eyes linger on him briefly. She didn't show much reaction. Her gaze rested on him for a moment before moving away, as if she were so used to it that no reaction was needed. But that was enough for me. I knew then that she too saw him. Now, even when I don't see my grandfather, I can feel his presence. When I read or eat, I would sometimes wonder what he might be doing in that parallel world. Yet whenever I saw him, he was always wearing clothes from his era, and I've never seen him with more wrinkles than I remember from the day he died. He would never age to 80 or 90, nor would he learn how to use a smartphone or the modern tractors and combines that could make his farming life much easier. He is bound to that single lifetime that he had. In the world we continued to live in, wrinkles deepened on my grandmother's face, and her figure shrank further. When she passed away last year, I didn't cry. No one in my family did. My parents calmly organized the funeral and spoke with the villagers who came to say goodbye. That reminded me of my grandfather's funeral, where distant relatives and friends looked sad, but not my parents or my grandmother. I realized that when they said my grandfather had gone to a distant place, they meant it. Although that wasn't accurate, they are still here with us. Soon after my grandmother left our world, my parents and I moved out of that house. It had become too old to live in. The roof leaked on rainy days, and in winter, icy wind pierced through the cracks between the wooden boards. When my mother locked that door, tears welled up in my eyes. We were moving to a new house where my grandparents had never been. Stuck in their lifetime, they wouldn't be able to join us there. But I found solace in knowing that this old house, where they had spent their lifetime together, would never truly be abandoned. Now they would have it all to themselves. Perhaps even with their parents, who had once lived in that house too. Maybe the next time I go back to visit, I will see them sitting together. Or perhaps, when I leave the world, I will return to that old house and reunite with them, as the child I once was, giggling on their laps. So actually, it's a piece about death, but I think, yeah.
That's perfectly for a birthday.
Yeah, yes, it's perfect for this, so that's why I want to read this one. Actually, the idea comes from because I used to dream about my grandfather in that old house where they used to live. So that's where this whole idea comes from. My grandmother is still alive, actually.